They say you never truly know someone until you see them in their darkest moment. I learned this lesson at 74, when the two people I trusted most in this world stood over my hospital bed, whispering about how much easier everything would be if I simply never woke up. My name is Margaret Chen, and I spent 47 years as a pediatric nurse at Boston Children's Hospital. I thought I understood human nature. I was wrong about so many things. The story begins 6 months before that hospital room revelation. I had been living in the same colonial in Brookline for 38 years. The house my late husband David and I bought when our son Michael was 5. After David's heart attack 3 years ago, the house felt too big, too quiet, but it held our memories. Michael had always been calculating, ambitious to a fault. His wife Sarah wrapped her own calculating nature in charm and apparent devotion to family. Their twin daughters, Emma and Sophie, were bright 12-year-olds who visited me every other weekend. Those visits were the highlight of my weeks. The first sign something was wrong came last spring. Michael called one evening, his voice tight with what he claimed was concern. "Mom," he said, "Sarah and I have been talking. We think it might be time to consider your options. The house is getting to be too much for you." I had been gardening that morning, had prepared dinner, had driven to the grocery store without incident. When I pointed this out, Michael's tone shifted to patronizing patience. "We just want what's best for you," he said. "There are wonderful senior living communities nearby." Over the following weeks, the pressure intensified. Sarah would call asking if I had looked at brochures yet. She had taken the liberty of requesting information from facilities with waiting lists. Meanwhile, Michael began finding excuses to skip our weekly dinners. When he did visit, he would walk through the house with an appraising eye, commenting on outdated fixtures, worn carpets, needed repairs. The girls still visited, but something felt different. They seemed subdued. One Saturday, Emma looked up at me with serious eyes and asked, "Grandma, are you really sick?" I assured her I was fine. She shrugged and said, "Mom and Dad talk about how worried they are about you living alone. They say old people can get confused." That night, I sat in David's old chair trying to make sense of my growing unease. My memory was fine. My health was good. So why did I feel like I was slowly being erased? My competence questioned at every turn. It was my neighbor Helen who first planted the seed of suspicion. One morning, she mentioned that she had seen Michael's car in my driveway several times when I wasn't home. When I confronted Michael, he seemed surprised, then admitted he had asked neighbors for their spare key months ago, just in case of emergencies. The fact that he had been in my house without my knowledge sent a chill through me. I began to notice things I had previously dismissed. The way Michael would steer conversations toward my finances. The way Sarah would comment on how tired I looked, how confused I seemed, especially in front of the girls. Then came the incident with my medication. I had been taking the same heart medication for 5 years. In late June, I noticed the pills looked different, slightly larger, and a different shade of white. When I called the pharmacy, they insisted nothing had changed. But I wasn't imagining the way the new pills made me feel. The fatigue intensified. I began having dizzy spells, moments of confusion that frightened me. My hands would shake unpredictably. Simple conversations became exhausting. During one particularly bad spell in July, instead of calling Michael as had become my habit, I called my old colleague Janet Rodriguez. Janet had worked alongside me for 20 years and retained the methodical, investigative nature that made her an excellent nurse. When Janet saw my condition, her first question wasn't about comfort measures. She asked to see my medications. Together, we examined each bottle, comparing the pills to photos on her phone. The heart medication was indeed different, not just in appearance but in dosage. Someone had been substituting a much stronger version, essentially poisoning me slowly. The realization hit like a physical blow. Someone had been deliberately making me sick. The only people with access to my house, my medicine cabinet, were Michael and Sarah. Janet wanted to call the police immediately, but I asked her to wait. I needed to understand the full scope of what was happening before making accusations that would tear our family apart. The next morning, feeling clearer after skipping the tampered medication, I drove to my bank. I asked to review all recent activity on my accounts. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Over the past 6 months, there had been systematic attempts to gain access to my finances. Someone had tried to add Michael as an authorized user, though the attempt was rejected because the signature didn't match. The bank manager showed me security camera footage from that day. It was Sarah, wearing a wig and glasses, but unmistakably Sarah, trying to impersonate me. I spent the rest of that day in a numb state, trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal. My son and daughter-in-law weren't just trying to control my living situation. They were actively trying to incapacitate me and steal my money. That evening, Janet and I made a plan. I would continue taking the correct medication, while pretending the substituted pills were still affecting me. This would give me time to think clearly, while maintaining the appearance of increasing frailty. Janet helped me set up a recording device that I could keep in my pocket. The hardest part was maintaining the facade of declining health when they visited. I had to remember to move slowly, to seem confused, to appear increasingly dependent. Their reactions to my apparent deterioration told me everything I needed to know. Sarah seemed energized by my decline, patting my hand condescendingly, and speaking in the loud, slow voice people used with invalids. Michael began making comments about my quality of life, wondering aloud whether it was fair for me to struggle when there were easier options. The breakthrough came in August, during a family dinner at their house. When I excused myself to use the bathroom, I heard voices through Michael's partially open office door. Sarah was on the phone, and Michael was with her. I activated my recording device and listened. Sarah was speaking to someone about insurance policies, specifically about life insurance payouts after a death. She mentioned my name, my age, and what she called the natural progression when someone becomes too sick to care for themselves. Michael's voice was quieter, but I heard him say they couldn't wait much longer, that the girls were asking too many questions, and that I was more resilient than expected. Then Sarah said something that made my legs weak. We might need to consider more direct measures. The medication isn't working fast enough, and she's starting to get suspicious. Maybe an accident. Something that looks natural for someone her age. Michael's response was barely audible, but I caught the crucial words. The stairs in her house are steep. People fall downstairs all the time. I managed to finish the meal, hug my granddaughters goodbye, all while my heart pounded. They weren't just stealing from me. They were planning to kill me. The next morning, Janet and I went to the police. Detective Maria Santos listened to my story, examined our evidence, and reviewed the recording. Her expression grew graver with each piece of information. The investigation moved quickly. Police obtained warrants to search Michael and Sarah's house, their computers, their phone records. They discovered extensive research into my financial assets, searches about medication overdoses and accidents involving elderly people, and communications about identity fraud. Most damning were text messages between Michael and Sarah discussing timeline and methods, expressing frustration that I was taking longer to deteriorate than planned. The arrest happened on a Tuesday morning. I watched from my window as police cars pulled into Michael's driveway, as my son and daughter-in-law were led out in handcuffs while neighbors stared. The media attention was intense but brief. Sarah pled guilty to fraud, attempted murder, and elder abuse, receiving 15 years. Michael got 12 years, with possibility of parole in 8. The hardest part wasn't their sentencing. It was Emma and Sophie. The girls went to live with Sarah's mother in California. She assured me they were receiving counseling, adjusting as well as could be expected, but weren't ready for contact with anyone from their father's side. For months after the trial, I struggled with anger, with questions about how I had failed to see the truth earlier. Janet visited almost daily, reminding me that I had been loving family the way family deserves to be loved, and that the failure was theirs, not mine. Slowly, with Janet's support and weekly therapy sessions, I began to rebuild my sense of self. I started with new locks, a security system, regular check-ins with trusted neighbors. I reclaimed my health, working with my doctor to address the lingering effects of the medication tampering. The most significant change came the following spring. I decided to turn my experience into something that could help others. Working with local elder services and the district attorney's office, I helped develop educational programs about elder abuse. I spoke at community centers and support groups, sharing my story and teaching others to recognize warning signs. The response was overwhelming. I heard from dozens of older adults who recognized elements of their own experiences, who had been questioning their perceptions or struggling with family members more interested in assets than affection. 2 years after the trial, I received a letter from Emma. She said she missed me, understood I had been trying to protect her and Sophie, and hoped we could talk when she was older. I wrote back immediately, telling her I loved her and would wait as long as necessary. Sophie wrote 6 months later with questions about why her parents had done what they did, whether I had suspected, how I had found courage to report them. Our correspondence has continued, growing more frequent over time. The girls are now 17, preparing for college, learning to trust again. 3 years after the trial, I sold the house in Brookline and bought a smaller condo in Cambridge. I furnished it with pieces that held good memories and new items that reflected who I was becoming rather than who I had been. Most importantly, I've learned to trust my instincts again. I recognize that I had sensed something wrong long before acknowledging it consciously. I had dismissed my concerns as paranoia, but my subconscious had been trying to protect me. Last month, I celebrated my 78th birthday with Janet, Detective Santos, and 2 other survivors of family financial abuse. It was a small gathering, but it felt complete in a way that large family celebrations never had. Emma called last week to tell me she had been accepted to nursing school. She said my stories about my career had inspired her interest in healthcare. Sophie is studying criminal justice, focusing on white-collar crime. She wants to understand how people become capable of betrayal and how society can better protect vulnerable populations. As I write this, sitting in my sunny living room with tea and a view of the Charles River, I think about the person I was 4 years ago. She was trusting, generous, eager to please, afraid of conflict, willing to doubt her own perceptions, rather than risk confronting uncomfortable truths. I'm still generous, but my generosity is now informed by wisdom, rather than naivety. I trust people, but I trust myself first. I know the difference between love and manipulation, between care and control. What happened to me was terrible, but it wasn't the end of my story. It was a chapter that led to greater self-awareness, deeper compassion for others, and a sense of purpose that might never have emerged otherwise. By refusing to be destroyed by what Michael and Sarah did, by choosing to transform my experience into advocacy and education, I've helped create a different legacy for Emma and Sophie. They won't be defined by their parents' crimes any more than I am defined by being their victim. I am 78 years old, and I am just beginning to understand how strong I really am.